Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. And I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. With these podcasts, we hope to explore some of the issues that touch us, our families, and our communities as a result of the impact of the revolution on longevity that's helping to reshape our Jewish world. And we appreciate your support. You can follow us on our homepage, jewishsacredaging.com. You can contact me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. And we welcome to the Seekers of Meaning video and microphones for our audio, the author of The Tin Horse, Janice Steinberg, greeting us from beautiful Southern California. So Janice, nice to see you, nice to talk with you. Thank you for joining us with all the technical craziness of modern life. So welcome to Seekers of Meaning. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. And thank you so much for inviting me.
No, our pleasure. This is a very interesting book. As I mentioned to you before we went on, I'm waiting for the Netflix miniseries any day now. It's a very interesting book, which we're going to get into. And I think will have significant resonance to many families. What you've written mystery stories before and have nominations and award. What was the motivation for The Tin Horse, which is not a true mystery story in a way? What drove you to do this?
I went through a period of time where I obsessively read the hard-boiled guys, Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. And so I read and reread their books because neither of them wrote very many of them.
I know, yeah.
In The Big Sleep, in Chandler's book, The Big Sleep, there was a scene that just grabbed my imagination. Philip Marlowe walks into a bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard. He wants information about another bookseller who is really peddling porn from the back room. And he walks into what looks like a legitimate bookstore. There's a woman working there. He pulls out a badge and starts asking her questions. And she doesn't know who is this guy? She doesn't know if she wants to tell him anything. They engage in this wonderful intellectual repartee. And, if you're familiar with the Raymond Chandler books, Philip Marlowe is a very smart guy. And this woman in the bookstore just gives as good as she gets. She's really sharp. She is described, our first look at her, she's reading a law book, and she's described as having the fine drawn face of an intelligent Jewess. When I read that, I just sort of stopped dead the first time I read it. And really, every time I read that book, I was fascinated by her in this, Chandler's world of the tough guys who take their first drink at 10 in the morning and the fast women who take their first drink at 9 in the morning. She was the one person I identified with. And it's a 3-page scene. She's not even named. She's just the intelligent Jewess. She was the one character I could identify with. I was fascinated by her. And I read the book initially when I was in my 20s, and she just stayed with me. I was so curious about who was she, what was her story, what was her Los Angeles? Because I had a feeling that, one of the beautiful things about the Chandler books is the way that Los Angeles becomes a character. The mean streets, the nightclubs, the tough.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, very much. And I had a feeling that there's this brief moment when these two characters, their paths cross, but that she occupied a really different Los Angeles. And so she stayed with me. And there was just a certain point when that story started. I think I cut my teeth by doing a mystery series, which really helped me learn to create plot, create characters. Before that, I had done, like many people, a lot of autobiographical writing. And unfortunately, my life is just not that interesting and dramatic. So writing mysteries helped me learn that craft. I guess I felt like I might be ready to take this project on.
So the Tin Horse is it's a generational story. It's a family story. It's a reconciliation story. It has a lot of symbolism, I think, in it. I mean, you have water symbolism with the river in Los Angeles, which I remember the first time I saw the Los Angeles River when I lived out there. I said, "Well, where's the river?" It's like, but the ocean and there's a lot of this symbolism in there. So, talk to me about this wonderful character, Elaine. Who is she? Who
So
is she?
as I started thinking about who would this woman be, what would her story be, I started to hear her. And I started to hear her not as the young woman in the bookstore, but as a woman in her 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who had been very politically involved. So I think of the Tin Horse as a kind of subgenre of novels that takes a character from another novel and tells their story. I mean, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead in theater is a great example of that. Ahab's wife, about the Captain Ahab from Moby Dick.
Right, right.
So, and I think that there's a kind of, I think, a rule that you need to follow, that even if there is just a tiny bit about the character in the original text that inspired you, that you want to be true to who that is. So I knew from the Chandler story, I knew that this woman was Jewish, lived in Los Angeles. She was reading a law book. She also, there's one point where she decides to trust Marlowe, and she gives him this incisive description of the man that he is interested in, the bookseller who's peddling porn from the back room. And he says to her, "You could be a cop." And she says, "I hope not." So I thought, all right, she's a leftist. She's somebody that is not flattered by hearing that she could be a cop. So I had that information about her. So when I guess I would call it, when I received the Elaine's voice, I knew that she had been an attorney and that she had probably been a really crusading attorney for liberal causes.
Mm-hmm. So,
and
no, go ahead, finish. Go ahead.
And the way that I wrote this book was really very different from my mysteries. My dad was a CPA, and I mean, my friends would laugh at me. I was the accountant of mystery authors. I would outline, I would know exactly where the story was going. I would have charts. With this book, and it's one reason that I didn't feel ready to write it until I had done a number of mysteries. I wasn't able to do that. It didn't let me outline and plan. I just went, I started with Elaine's voice in my head and saw where it took me.
So there is a mystery here. I mean, there without, spoiler alert, but there is a mystery here with Elaine and the sister, and the mystery of what happens to the sister and the search for the sister. It's very, very much, you were channeling the Ahab story, Moby Dick. It's, it's her cause. That's her, and it's interesting that you start the book when she's downsizing, and it's sort of like the last Thanksgiving that you write about. It immediately reminded me of the old Levinson movie Avalon, where before everything disintegrates with the family, they have the one last Thanksgiving dinner, which of course is rather than the Jewish dinner, a Seder, this is the American religion, secular religion of America. And because you talk about the secularization of this family, and you have all kinds of, which we'll get to in a minute, but there is this mystery because she's hunting. Her white whale is finding her sister who disappears. And so then talk to me a little bit about the sister, Kay. The other dish.
Kay is the name she ends up giving herself. She starts as Barbara.
Barbara, the sister who runs away and becomes. So talk to me about. There's the mystery, and what is that? And talk to me a little bit about that. Is it family? Is it family dynamics? Is it estrangement, or is it symbolically searching for something that we can never really find until we find it? And is that the Moby Dick in the Tin Horse?
I have to tell you, I love that you are bringing in Moby Dick, because with my husband's family, a pandemic project that we had was meeting once a week and reading Moby Dick.
Oh, wow.
I had never read it before, and we did a few chapters every week. We just finished. So my husband's sibs are going to be just so tickled that Moby Dick came into this conversation. What I was, I think that there's the book you're consciously writing, certainly with writing a novel, and there's the unconscious book. Consciously, I wanted to explore that phenomenon of negotiating the hyphen that was coined by sociologists, I believe, to talk about Jewish hyphen Americans. And now, if you Google negotiating the hyphen, it's Indian Americans, Chinese Americans. So it's expanded. But I wanted to have one character who embraced both sides of that identity, being Elaine. I wanted to have her sister really want to erase the Jewish part of her identity and just be American, which, I think for so many immigrants, people in immigrant families, is such a deep wish. And then my third character, Danny, of course,
we'll get to Danny in a minute. Yeah.
Okay, but so he's the third iteration of how you might negotiate that hyphen.
But you also have, very interesting enough, which I found fascinating. I think her name is Molly, who's the union organizer. And part of the American Jewish experience in the 20s and 30s is a very, very heavy emphasis on being the union organizer, the Ladies Garment Workers Union, AFL. See, a lot of tremendous amount of coming out of the labor Zionist movement. Because when I was reading this, I said, okay, here's the union organizer component, and then here's Danny, the Fabrente Zionist, who goes and speaks at rallies and berates Elaine about being assimilated or this, and why don't you live in Israel, and I'm going to go and live in Israel, which is, and so you mix them all together, and it really is in many ways a snapshot of 20th century American Jewish life. So did you do that purposely, or was this sort of like organically evolved?
I did a lot of research. I love doing research, and I did research into Los Angeles. Well, so to start with, I found this amazing community that I had not been aware of, Boyle Heights.
Oh, yeah.
I began with, so Elaine is Jewish. She's living in Los Angeles. She's a young woman in Los Angeles in about 1939, 1940, the time when The Big Sleep was published. And where would she live? So I started to do research into the history of Jews in Los Angeles, which took me very quickly to Boyle Heights, an area that is just east of downtown Los Angeles. It's on the other side of the LA River. And so here we are at the river again.
No, it's very important. Very important.
And Boyle Heights, I hadn't been aware, but between the First and Second World Wars was this enormous, lively, vibrant Jewish neighborhood. It was, I read at one point, it was the largest Jewish neighborhood on the West Coast.
Oh, yeah.
So I started with researching Boyle Heights, and then, I'm not remembering the name of the journal, but there was a journal from Los Angeles Jewish Historical Society, Western Jewish Historical Society. And so I looked at articles for what was happening at that time. There was a big effort to unionize the garment workers.
All right.
There was a woman named Rose Passata, who was a union organizer originally from maybe Lithuania, Latvia, who was one of the, for a woman to rise really high in the ranks of the union at that time, she had to be very forceful. And so I looked at Rose Passata was sent out to organize the dressmakers in Los Angeles. She was sent on a plane, which is why I have Molly come on an airplane. So, and a number of the things that happen when Molly is there are taken from, fortunately, Rose Passata wrote a memoir and somebody wrote a biography of her. So
wow.
I loved finding out about all this. There was the Long Beach earthquake which I put in the book.
The book, right.
In 1933, I think, was, something that really happened. So I loved, and the other amazing thing, I mentioned that one of the things I loved about Raymond Chandler's novels is the way that Los Angeles becomes a character. And I thought, well, I'm going to put my heroine in a different Los Angeles, and what a shame to lose that rich sense of the city as a character. And then I discovered that Boyle Heights was so rich, and there had been an oral history project done by the Jewish Historical Society of Southern California maybe 10, 12 years before I started my research. Interviews with Jewish Angelenos who had grown up in Boyle Heights, talking about their memories. I was able to go to a library at the Jewish Federation in LA with my little, cassette player and headphones, and just spend 2 or 3 days there listening to people's stories.
So is that
which was such a treat.
Is that where you have the, because part of the Tin Horse, and we're talking with Janice Steinberg about her book, The Tin Horse, obviously available on the Great God Amazon, and still bookstores, but there's a significant immigrant motif within the Tin Horse. And in that research that you did, is that where you came up with the Fuscuius,
Yes.
which was a fascinating thing? Tell me about the Fuscuius.
So they were mentioned in Irving Howe's book. I mean, where I saw them was Irving Howe's book, Something of My Father's. Famous history of Jews in America.
Right.
And then, so the Fuscuiers were footgoers, Yiddish for footgoers.
Okay,
It was a movement that started in Romania, where it began with young people who were going to walk all the way to the Atlantic Ocean and go to America. And they trained, they went on hikes, they were, kind of like scouts. I mean, there was something very adventurous and jolly about the whole thing. They put on amateur theatricals. Once they set out, they put on amateur theatricals in towns that they stopped in exchange for, someone would let them sleep in the barn and the people in the town would give them something to eat. Once they got past the border of Romania into I guess at that point, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, there were some philanthropists who actually paid for them to take trains, get to where they could embark for America. So, it began as this very adventurous thing with young people and gradually became families, not so adventurous, but more desperate. Yeah, I was fascinated by the Fuscuius. I found that, as I said, this story didn't let me outline it. It just presented itself to me. And when I started telling the mother's story of coming from Romania, it threatened to overwhelm the book. I end up having to divide it. Part of it gets told in one chapter, another part, 10 chapters further on, another part toward the end, because she just had so much to say. That story, as it just kept revealing itself to me in more and more detail.
Well, you mentioned that, and I want to pick up something before we start running out of time, because I think, putting on my rabbi hat, there's a lot of the book of Genesis in the Tin Horse. First of all, there's a story of reconciliation and of loss, estrangement, and reconciliation. It's it's the Jacob and Esau mythology writ large, except played out in Southern California and in Montana. I think Kay winds up in Montana, and it's also a story that deals with family secrets, like some of the secrets with mom, and the secret of the estranged sister, and this revelation towards the end. Spoiler alert about who really knew where she was and when she was there. I went. Were you conscious of the Jacob Esau mythology in the book of Genesis and this whole idea of because Jacob gets his name changed, Barbara changes her name to Kay. Very, very biblical, and this whole family secrets thing. Where did that come from?
Wow, I'm just like taking this in. I had not, as I was saying earlier, there's the story that you consciously tell, and then there's the story that emerges. And although I deeply love Torah, I was not conscious of doing the biblical story, and I'm just so delighted that
it's right there.
That's something that you see in the book, because I don't think we've mentioned that Elaine and Barbara are twins.
Right. Oh, that's right. We did.
And
right.
so that is very Jacob and Esau. And I did not consciously do that. I do think that for me, the unconscious story that the story that became conscious after the book was published was about how we tell stories to create our identity. That we live surrounded by story. We have our family stories. We have the stories of our country, the stories of our people. They tell us what our values are, what's important, how to be a good person. And then we turn our lived experience into story. But as we do that for a whole raft of reasons having to do with areas of ourselves that we're blind to, protecting ourselves, having a certain image of who we are, we edit those stories. Often very unconsciously. We choose what we're going to tell and what we're going to conceal. So, in the sense that in Torah, it's very much about the stories that are told. I love thinking that there's that connection. Thank you.
There's a lot of look when Danny makes Aliyah. When he goes to Israel, it's Genesis 12. It's Lech Lecha. Go forth to a place that I will show you. And he goes forth. He leaves that, it wasn't very kind to him anyway in Boyle Heights. But he goes and he makes this jump. He has faith. It is a Genesis 12 Lech Lecha moment. But I before we run out of time, I got to ask you this one quote, which I will tell you I will steal, or not. That's the wrong word. I will borrow and give you credit in workshops that we do in Jewish Sacred Aging on family dynamics and stuff like this. You have this beautiful quote, and they're twins, okay? And there's a dialogue, I think, towards when they meet, when Barbara and Barbara Kay meet, and you write, quote, every person grows up in a different family, unquote. Two people in the same family, same mom, same dad. Every person grows up in a different family. I mean, those of us who are parents and have raised more than one child and know that that's 100% true. Talk to me about that quote, because I think it really sums up a tremendous amount of, and it was almost a motif in the book with this relationship with these two sisters.
Well, I think it relates back to that we turn our lived experience into stories. And the choices that we make as we do that are going to vary for each person. So that, when I talk to my brothers about something that happened in our childhood, they may not remember. An incident that was so strong for me, they may have no memory of.
Right.
Or if we do both remember it, that we have very different takes on it. So that, because we have our stories and then we make meaning out of our stories. And, depending on each person's temperament, and all the other stories that it's part of, the whole sort of gestalt of the narrative, we are going to assign different meanings to those lived experiences.
And so each of us lives our own family experience. You're absolutely, I have two children, and they're 180 degrees different, same mom, same dad. And there's many people who we've talked about this with a lot of friends of mine. And you say, well, wait a minute, this person does this has this. They grew up in the same family, but each grew up in a different family. And so I wanted to point that quote out, because it's really, when I read it, I underlined it in the book, and it's like, okay, this is got to raise this on the podcast. Janice Steinberg, the author of The Tin Horse, available through bookstores and, of course, the great God Amazon. This generational sweep. It's a history. It's a story of immigration, of reconciliation, of loss and regained, what was lost, of faith and secrets. So thank you very much, Janice, for being with us here on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning podcast. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Enjoy Southern California, and continued good luck and continued success. And I'm glad you're channeling the film noir literature which was a great literature. Those books and those films were magnificent. So thank you very much. Continue. Just stay safe and stay healthy. You be good. Thank you.
You too.
To all of you, again, thank you for watching in today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV show and podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. Remember, the show is available on the Roku streaming service. And again, we welcome your comments and suggestions to me. Email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com, and we invite you to go and also visit our Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. And if you'd like to make a donation, a tax-free donation to help support our work and these podcasts, go to jewishsacredaging.com and click on the conveniently located icon button, donate icon. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the broadcast centers of Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out and thank you, as usual, to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I look forward to greeting you again on our next Seekers of Meaning TV show and podcast. Take care, stay safe, stay healthy. Shalom.